Hey friends, it is Chrissy, and welcome back to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. We are about to kick it as old school as it gets with how God created us to live, which is free. And today we are kicking off season 7. And as you know, one of our favorite guests is Travis Stewart. He is back by popular demand. So many listeners love Travis. I mean, who doesn't love Travis? Travis, right? You feel the love?
I feel loved, yeah.
Wonderful. And thank you for coming back, Travis.
It's good to be here. Thank you for having me.
You're welcome. Friends, if you are not aware, Travis Stewart has spent over 3 decades thoughtfully integrating Christian faith, psychology, and personal growth in his work as a counselor, teacher, and speaker. He currently serves in development at Covenant Seminary, where he helps advance the seminary's mission to equip leaders for the broader church. Travis is also a member of the board of directors for Caris Eating Disorder Care, a Christian nonprofit treatment center dedicated to holistic healing for those with eating disorders. With a background as a licensed professional counselor since 2005, Travis brings a relational and creative approach to his work, rooted in helping others understand their stories in light of God's redemptive grace and developing a deeper, honest trust of God. His work has largely focused on eating disorders, body image, and spiritual formation. Travis was the visionary behind Finding Balance Hungry for Hope Conference, a pioneering faith-based event for those impacted by eating disorders. An engaging and thoughtful communicator, Travis has been invited to speak at institutions such as Pepperdine University, Baylor, Washington University, and has taught as a visiting instructor at Covenant Seminary in St. Louis, Missouri, where he lives with his wife, Susan, who will also be on the show later this season. Together, they have 2 adult children, a son-in-law, and a grandson. For fun, Travis loves golfing, art, and taking a deep delight in anything his grandson says or does. Grandpa Travis?
Yeah, it's so good. It's so rich to be a grandpa, so thank you.
Oh, wait. Now, do you have a name? Are you like Poppy or?
I'm granddad. So my dad was granddad, his dad was granddad, so that's sort of the carrying on that tradition.
I love that, Granddad Travis. So cool. All right. Well, Travis, we're going to make this simple. We're just going to kind of walk into what we're talking about today. I'm just going to ask you to just kick us off. Tell us what we're talking about.
Yeah, so the title I use is The 3 Chairs. And so this is a way of thinking about people, about Christian growth, about anything from emotions to urges to relationships. And it's not my invention. It's been used in some other circles. I first saw it presented by some other therapists, but it's not widely known either. There's no publications about it. I've just seen it in some seminars and things like that. It was used in some different clinical settings. And so it's something that when I saw it, I was like, oh my gosh, this really makes sense. And I began to use it in my own work with clients and then just in my own life. And so I've continued to think about it. I still work with a handful of clients. And so it's really the underlying framework for that. But yeah, so the 3 chairs is what we're talking about today. And it's probably easiest to start to walk through that. But basically, it's going to give listeners a way of trying to understand themselves. Why do I do what I do? Why do I struggle? And what does growth look like? And what does transformation look like? And what does trusting God? So, I mean, a Bible word would be sanctification.
Okay.
But in a really practical sense, like what is sanctification? And we're looking largely at sort of the relational side of that. Like, how do I love God, love others? So there's some integration and some thinking about theology and psychology that sort of comes all together. But probably the best way to do it is to sort of dive into it, and to talk about, well, what are these 3 chairs, right? So I will just start by telling you what they are, because I first saw them in a workshop. And like the presenter had 3 chairs at the front of the room. There's probably a better name for this. I don't know, the psychodynamic, triunity, we'll make something up. I don't know.
Listen, that's not our style here at Old School Food Freedom. We need it cut and dry and simple.
Right. 3 chairs. So I'd seen them present. And so in recent years, probably the last 5 or 6 years, and then even the last decade and stuff, you've heard more and more therapeutic language about heart's work, One of the things that's made that more popular is internal family systems, so IFS. So that's a form of parts work. So this is a way of thinking about parts work in some ways. And there's a lot of overlap, say, with internal family systems a little bit, but it's also simpler, easier to understand, easier to grasp. There's only 3 parts instead of with IFS, you can name multiple different psychological personality kind of parts. And I really like how this lines up with scripture. And so we'll get into that as I explain each part. So does that make sense?
Yeah, that's really good. And I know the IFS because I've gone through it myself. And so I like that you said that because there are times where I find myself getting so confused about which part is doing what and why.
Yeah.
So I'm excited to see the parts that I know and have identified about myself from the past. Where would they fit in these 3 chairs?
Yeah. So we'll do that. So there's a lot of things that I find helpful about IFS. I actually was able to get a little bit of training from Richard Schwartz, who developed IFS at one of the treatment centers I worked at. Not much. I've not done a lot of training, but I was able to be around him a couple times. And so there's some things I really like about that and some things that I just like this better. So let's start thinking about, well, what are these 3 parts or these 3 chairs? And so the reason for chairs is sort of like when we're thinking, acting, behaving, living, in this model, we're going to be living primarily out of one of those parts. And so when I saw the workshop, it was like the person leading the workshop pulled a person from the audience. And as they talked, they had them move from chair to chair. Like, oh, this is your little boy part, right? And then the middle chair we call the false self, is sort of the language. Sometimes I'll use the word survivor, and we'll get to why I use that language. And then the third one is the wise and trusting beloved self. So the 3 parts would be the child, the false self, and then the wise, trusting, beloved self is how I would say it. And so I at sometimes have used this in therapy when I'm using it. Sometimes I actually have a person sit like on a couch with 3 cushions, and I'll have them move from cushion to cushion as we do this dialogue and things like that. So that's where the chair language comes from. But I can think about it in the sense of like, if I'm relating to someone in a setting, like, where's my sense of self placed right now? Is it placed out of this old false self that's trying to make life work apart from God? Or am I operating and sitting and resting more in this new self? So it'll make more sense as we go along. So
yeah, I'm tracking.
And then I know we're going to do 2 episodes. So the next episode, I think we'll take a deeper dive. And some of what we do in that will be practical, like what are some practical skills I can do. And other than that will just sort of be more deep dive, sort of whatever you and I get curious about as we talk, we can take deeper dives into that. So
sounds great to me. Yeah, I'm ready.
Okay. So let's start with the child self. I think it's helpful to think about that in each of us. There is a part that was made in God's image. We know that's true from Scripture. Scripture teaches us that from Genesis 1 and 2, we were made in the image of God. And what that means, it means a lot of things theologically. But in this context, part of what that means is we were made for primarily relationship. So one of the most fundamental truths about God, which we don't often think about, is that God is relational. God existed in community, in the Trinity, before creation. One of the primary things that's true about what Christians believe about God is that God is relational in himself, Father, Son, Spirit, relating to one another in perfect unity, honoring, blessing one another, submitting to one another, and loving one another. And so if we're made in God's image, one of the primary things it means is that we are relational. We are made for relationships, okay? So then we come into the world as children. That is a core function, a core need, core reality about who we are. So when I say the child self, that's part of what I mean is like, what were you made for? And so as a child, we were just talking about my grandson, right?
Yeah.
He's 17 months old. There's some things that he needs from a relational standpoint. So we can think about other needs such as food, shelter, safety, but we're going to focus in on the relational part for this. And so as we think about that, I like a list by Mark and Debbie Laser. Mark was a Christian psychologist. They wrote a book called 7 Desires of Every Heart. And there's 7 longings or desires that they named that I think are super helpful for us to think about from a sort of what do kids need, but what do I always need? This child part doesn't go away. just because I get older. So this child part's still there and these longings are still there. And so I'll go through those 7 needs really quickly to kind of give you a picture of what this means. So the first one would be to be heard and understood. These aren't necessarily in order of importance, okay?
Okay.
But I have a need to be heard and understood. So someone hears me and understands me, or they're doing their best. It's hard to totally put yourself in the shoes of another person. But if you and I are talking, it's important that we're connecting and that you're hearing and understanding me to the best of your ability. And that's important in relationships to me, that I have that in my life. So that's number 1. Number 2, we have a longing and a need for affirmation. Affirmation is, well, I'll clarify it a little bit as we talk about the third one, which is blessing, to be blessed. Okay, so these are similar in some ways, but the way I like to think about them is affirmation is being told that I'm good at something. Blessing is being told that I'm enjoyed.
Oh, yeah.
Okay, if I'm talking to my adult daughter and she's telling me about something at work, to affirm her, says, man, you did a really good job on that project. You know, your boss encouraged you, you got a raise. I can see that you're a good listener and that you're good at building relationships. That's affirmation. I'm telling her what she's good at. Affirmation helps us understand like our gifting and our skills, and affirmation will help us choose a career and all those types of things, right?
Yeah.
If I want to bless my daughter, I say, I love being with you. I enjoy our time together. I love watching you be a mom, right? I could tell her, you're a great mom. You are patient. You are kind. That's affirmation. I love watching you be a mom. That's blessing. So we need both of those. So heard and understood, affirmation, blessing. The next one is to be safe.
Before you go to that one, can I follow up
Yeah.
or clarify something?
Yes.
What I feel like I thought I heard or sensed in that is the blessing part. It's like, if you're saying that to your daughter, you're showing her that you are being blessed by watching that, or
That's not the way I was thinking of, but yes, I would say that's true.
okay.
But I am blessing her. We all have a longing to experience blessing, which means another way of saying that is to be enjoyed.
Okay, yes.
Right? You need to know that somebody enjoys being in your presence.
Yes.
Now, one of the ways that happens is if I say, I'm blessed by your presence.
Yeah.
I mean, so it goes both ways.
Okay, perfect.
So affirmation is about kind of performance and skill. Blessing has nothing to do with performance.
Yeah.
It's presence. Okay. So blessing can even happen in the absence of performance. Like you failed. I still enjoy you. Right? That's blessing.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Ready for the next one?
I'm ready.
Okay. So safety. We need relational safety. We need physical safety. We need to know that if there is rupture in a relationship, we can have repair. Ideally, those are all the things we need, is that we can trust someone is trustworthy, right? So that's safety. Then touch. We need healthy physical touch. So that would be hugs and cuddles and handshakes and pats on the back. And then in appropriate context, healthy physical sexual touch. We have longings and needs for all of those. These are all human longings and needs. And of course, when you start to think about that one, like that one can get really uncomfortable because so many people have been touched in unsafe ways.
Yeah, right.
So what's true about all of these needs is that all of them can be misused. I can hear you and understand you and then gossip about you. I can affirm you, but I can do it in such a way that I'm trying to get something from you. So we really need the true versions of these things. The next one is to be chosen. I need to feel like somebody chooses me as a friend, as a teammate, as a spouse, as an employee. Like we have human longings to be chosen. And then the last one is included. I belong somewhere. So I belong to a family. I'm a fan of a certain sports team. Like I'm included in a sense of community and identity. So those are 7 core needs. Those in some ways really explain well the needs of a child that never go away. So I'm going to pause there. Any thoughts or questions or anything on that so far?
I would just follow up and say, so these are the core needs. When you say who we were made to be, God created us to have these core needs.
Yes.
From
birth. Yeah, absolutely.
When he formed us in our mother's womb, like that was the core need. And that never goes away just because you move from child to adult or, senior citizen or whatever. That core need will always be there.
Those core needs never go away, and they're good needs.
Yeah.
Some people I know, especially in the eating disorder world, and can feel like I shouldn't be needy. I shouldn't
Yes.
need that. And that's just not true. You were made this way. You were made for this. And so to be human is to be limited, meaning we're not God, we're not infinite. And to be limited means to have needs. I have needs for sleep, I have needs for food, and I also have emotional, relational needs. And so these are good things. And so some people get really uncomfortable because their needs have been used against them, which is abuse. But that doesn't make the needs wrong. It means the abuse of the needs was wrong. And so that can get complicated.
Yeah. And I could see how even as young as infancy, how a new mother, or maybe she's not a new mother, but how a mother or a caregiver, if a child is crying and they can't seem to meet the need, food isn't working, they've changed their diaper and they're crying and crying. And if the caregiver doesn't know how to handle that and walks away, but the baby keeps crying, like, is that something even in infancy where it's like a core need isn't being met? Can that
Yep,
kind of form
absolutely.
something? Okay. Yeah.
And this overlaps with attachment theory. I don't know if you've had anybody on the podcast talk about
Yeah.
attachment theory, but this overlaps with that, and nobody experiences total perfect attachment, so nobody gets all of these needs met.
Great point. And grace for moms, grace for dads, grace upon
Yep.
grace with this.
And in fact, I don't think God set it up so that people get these needs perfectly met. I think the only place that we eventually get these perfectly met is in our relationship with God. I think in the new heavens and the new earth. I just don't think it's designed for perfect. So all of that leads us to God. Our limitations do. So the child self is defined by these. These longings come from our original design. And then the way we experience getting these needs met or not met begins to shape our core beliefs. So it might be, I'm unlovable, or I am lovable. Some of that's getting shaped by how did you experience getting these needs met? So one thing I've done with clients is let's look through these needs. Which ones do you think were met well in your family and which ones weren't met well in your family? Which ones might have been met in an unhealthy way?
Mm-hmm.
Like flattery would be an unhealthy form of affirmation. And so we begin to develop core beliefs about ourselves, like I'm unlovable, or I am lovable, or I need to be perfect in order to get these needs met, right? And so we're starting to shift a little bit into the next chair, but that's where it's there. So what I want to say before we move on to the next section is we always have these needs, but we often don't slow down to pay attention to them. So one of the things that is helpful to do when I'm working with clients, I start to ask questions that will get them back to this point. So if they say, I'm so mad at my boss, we start to process. And my eventual goal in one hand is to get them to say, I just didn't feel like I was heard and understood.
Gotcha. Yes.
Underneath all the different fancy language we use and all the different conversations is at some level, probably we can identify one of these needs, like I didn't feel safe. And when I do that, I often ask a client, or if I'm journaling myself, which we'll come back to, I will try to think, okay, how would a 5-year-old express what I'm experiencing right now? Okay. So if I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm not getting along with anybody at work and so said this, and I can't believe they did that. If I can just boil that down to how would a 5-year-old say that, I might say something like, I don't feel like I have any friends. Nobody likes me. And that is getting closer to the emotion and the heart of what's going on.
That's good.
So, and it's vulnerable.
Oh, yeah. I know I'm already feeling some kind of way like,
Yeah. Right. And we just don't normally go there.
Yeah.
We don't want to go there because children are vulnerable.
Yes. But it's good. I just love where this is going. I'm just going to keep letting you talk.
Okay.
Because I'm processing mentally right now.
Well, feel free to jump in at any time. So,
Okay.
So I would say that the child part of us, if we want to learn to access it better, and it's scary. Some people are like, I don't want to access that child part. That child part was abandoned or abused. I don't want to go there. And yeah, that makes sense. So take it slow, but focus on concrete and simple thinking, vulnerable expression, and kind of boil it down to simple words, right? This part of us will show up in two ways. One is when we are self-aware. Like when I can boil it down and go, yeah, that didn't go well at work today. And I just felt like gosh, if I don't do well, will anybody like me? So that's one way to get to it. The other way this shows up is if something triggers us into a childlike part. Like if, I won't go into the whole long story, but there was an experience I had at church a while back where we were visiting a new church. We walked into this thing where we didn't know anybody in the room and we had to go find a seat at a table.
Oh, gosh.
Right?
Right.
So I was a kid. We moved a lot. My dad was military. And so I was like right back to that first day at school at a new school where I didn't know anybody. And the little boy part of me, it was just like, no, nobody will like me. Nobody will want to be my friend, all of that stuff. So the little boy part sort of just showed up uninvited. Like,
Right.
So that's sort of the child self. So now when that little boy showed up at that church thing, guess who else showed up? My false self. My false self was like, okay, because what happens is we're made for these longings, but we live in a fallen world. We live in a sinful world. We get hurt. We hurt others. And to survive this, we go, how am I going to do it? How am I going to survive in the world? And so we develop this false self. In other words, we develop a way of how am I going to make life work apart from God? How am I going to make a life work? So how am I going to navigate relationships? How am I going to navigate fear? How am I going to navigate hurt? And it's not conscious, and yet it's purposeful. And there's a difference in that. Like conscious is, I'm going to do this so that this. Purposeful is, my behavior is going to make sense. So that is determined by our genetics, our upbringing, our culture, our temperament, all these different things, right? So one kid might say, I'm going to survive in the world by being tough. Nobody's going to get to me.
Yep.
I'm going to be tough and I'm going to win and I'm going to take charge. And another kid might go, I'm going to be sweet and I'm going to be liked and I'm going to work really hard to get people to like me. Very different. And yet the energy is the same as how am I going to make life work apart from God?
I mean, I never really thought about it like that.
Yeah.
I would be like, how am I going to get people to like me kind of thing.
Which is such a sweet Christian thing to do.
Of course
isn't
it is.
And it gets applauded.
At Finding Balance, we believe freedom is not found in diets or body image. It is found only in Jesus. That's why we've created tools like our daily vitamin devotionals, prayer groups, and community, and the Lasting Freedom course to encourage you on your journey. So check them out at findingbalance.com and take your next step toward freedom in Him.
But this is essentially what I believe what the Apostle Paul calls the flesh. In Scripture, flesh can mean flesh. It can mean actual body and flesh. But when Paul's using it in the New Testament, it largely refers to this sort of energy of self that doesn't trust God. So this motivating energy within us. He also calls it the old nature, old creation, new creation. This is the old stuff. This is the flesh. This is how I'm going to survive apart from God. So we develop this. This is born within us. We're born sinners, so we have this already at birth also, but it gets developed over time more fully. And so I'm going to figure out how to do it. So some of the things that define the false self is that self-protection, and we begin to sort of fearfully demand that those needs get met. Okay? So what that might look like is I'm going to be in charge. I'm going to be the boss. I'm going to roll people over so that my needs get met and I get my way. Or I'm going to demand that you like me, and I'm going to do so in a sort of a seductive, people-pleasing way. But they're both the same thing. I'm going to figure out how to make it work.
Because you said it's when we don't trust God, so we feel like there's something we have to do to control the situation.
Yeah. And this is human nature. Like everybody does this.
Yeah.
We all do this. And it is part of the sin nature. It is, I will survive. And I'll do whatever it takes to survive. And apart from the redemption of God and Him transforming us and changing us, I will continue on that path my entire life. And it'll largely look the same. So this is where things like personality tests and those types of typologies can be helpful, is they can help you understand what is your approach. What does your false self look like? And so that might be the Enneagram or the Myers-Briggs or some of those things that can be helpful in helping you figure it out. So a couple of things I've been reflecting on lately. My false self will work hard to manage your opinion of me.
Same.
right?
Yeah.
So I recently had a conversation with someone where I found out that something I did was unhelpful. It wasn't intentional on my part, although it was probably purposeful, to go back to that language. Like, I did something that had negative consequences and negatively impacted someone else. And when I found this out, I was talking to a third party. They said, hey, this happened. It affected this person over here. Person A was telling me person B was affected. And I was like, how is person B doing? Do I need to do any reconciliation? And she said, no, she's good. But after we hung up, I wanted to write an email to person B to check in and say, hey, sorry, I know this happened, et cetera, et cetera. That's not what I meant to happen, et cetera. But as I reflected on it, I was like, that's not because I'm that concerned about her. It's because I want to manage my reputation. I don't want her to think I was a bad guy. Now, on one hand, that doesn't seem that damaging, but that's not love. That's self-protection. That's me managing my reputation. That's me finding safety, hope, and life in my reputation, not in what God says about me. So I didn't send the email as much as I want to, because I've already been told she's okay.
Yeah.
My false self would be sending that email. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm over here trying not to like turn purple from just like you're telling a whole story of like something I wish I would have known to ask you about and help me through about 5 months ago. Like,
Right.
same sort of thing. And I could just even see myself going from, gosh, I was misunderstood. Is she okay? That's definitely not what I ever intended. I knew it felt weird and I want to make it right. Yet then it went to a point where I could feel myself survivor mode, getting defensive. Like, I mean, I don't even know how to articulate it,
Yeah.
but
Well, that's because it's hard.
it's so hard. Yeah. And I want to have friends.
Right.
And if you don't want to be friends, it's okay. Just don't hate me. Just don't be mad at me. Just know I meant well. And I'm sorry it didn't come across well.
Right. And it's the part of just know that I meant well.
Yeah.
That sounds good, but it's more about me taking care of me rather than trusting God or taking care of the other person. That's what's tricky about sin. Like, because we can sort of go, well, I know cheating on your taxes is sin. Even people who struggle with eating disorders can say, well, I know that binging's not right or whatever. But those are only sort of symptoms of the bigger problem. So I'd say that our false self has sort of umbrella strategies and then more specific strategies. Okay. And this is where you were talking about IFS and your different parts. So I sort of think of all of my parts, to use IFS language. I would say there's one part, but it has many strategies. So one of my strategies might be people pleasing. One of my strategies might be reputation management. One of my strategies might be using food to comfort myself. One of my strategies might be perfectionism. So I think of those as strategies that my false self will take on at different times. But I would say there's usually sort of 1 to 3 large overarching strategies. And then the eating disorder behaviors or the other compulsive behaviors, they're going to line up with that, right? So if a client comes to me who's anorexic, yeah, we want to talk about her particular behaviors with food or his particular behaviors with food. Certainly, we're going to talk about those things. But what I'm interested in is what are the bigger themes behind that? So let's just take, for example, like I'm going to eat clean, right? I'm going to eat specific foods and only specific foods. And I'm going to avoid bad foods or quote unclean foods and things like that, right?
He's air quoting like crazy just to hear me.
Yeah.
Right?
Right. Yeah. So there's air quoting, quote bad, unquote bad foods, things
Yeah.
like that, right? I'm going to avoid all that stuff. It's sort of what their false eating disorder self is doing. That's an issue. We need to talk about those things. We need some education about quote bad foods, unquote bad foods. But if I never get to the bigger issue, which is, let's just say, perfectionism. That's the bigger theme because you know what? Perfectionism isn't just going to show up in the way you eat. It's going to show up in the way you do relationships. It's going to show up in the way you treat yourself. It's going to show up in the way you do spirituality.
Yes. Time with Jesus. I feel seen.
Right? Like if I don't have quiet times every day, then I'm not a good Christian or whatever, which is not that different than if I don't eat the right foods every day, I'm not a good person. Same. Does that make sense?
It is hitting hard.
Yeah.
And here's my daily reminder, grace upon grace. There is no shame intended. If you are feeling shame at any point, that's not coming from us and that is not coming from the Lord. That's coming from the enemy. There is conviction, and that's the Lord gently showing you something that maybe needs to change for your good, for your freedom.
Yes.
One step. And so, I mean, I know you'll probably get sick of it, but like I have to tell myself this on the daily, like, okay, shame off me. Let's get gently curious and step into this. And now I'm going to be bringing that childhood Chrissy in. I'm curious, sweet girl. I wonder why that bothered. Like this is
Right.
like this is the conversation I'm having in my only child brain.
Yes, that's absolutely right. You're already applying it, right?
Hey.
So what's going on? Well, I'm afraid, or I feel like a bad girl, or something like that. And this is a good transition. I love your application of grace because this is a good transition to the third chair. But just to summarize, the child self, the created in God's image self, has core needs. Those don't get met in a perfect world. It's an imperfect world. So we develop, or our false self gets developed in order to try to meet those needs. So in one sense, the false self is trying to take care of the child self. I'm going to take care of and meet those needs. And they work for a while. Okay, it works. And so we're drawn to, and I'll just say this really quickly, we can maybe dive back into this in the second episode, but we're drawn to whatever is powerful, comforting, and available. So that's our false self uses what's powerful. So does something feel powerful when I do it? So does getting good grades feel powerful when I do it? You know, for some people, like, yeah, I got an A, so what? Another person's like, oh, that felt really rewarding. So it's powerful. Is it available? So if you grew up in some cultures where an abundance of food isn't available, like binging's not going to really be an option. Or you grew up where exercise isn't valued, it's not really available in a sense. So you're not going to use that. And does the thing provide comfort? Does you get some emotional relief from it? So those are the things that our false self gets drawn into.
Can I say,
Yeah.
I'm seeing how, like we've talked on our show before about pornography use and sexual shame and things like that, but I can see how the false self, the survivor, powerful, comfortable, available, promiscuity or things like that could come into play. Food, like there's so many, even the term binging, air quotes, binging Netflix, binge watching your shows, like the fact that like people would call, oh, it's a binge-worthy podcast. Like, but binging, that's out of balance. Like, I definitely want you to listen to Old School Food Freedom, but please just like do it with balance, you know, find the balance in it. So do those fit in that category?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay.
Yep, you nailed it. So we may be feeling shame or guilt or conviction. The beautiful thing about the gospel is that God looks at all these things and he looks at our survivor false self strategies and he goes, I know, and we'll work on it because I've created you. I know what sin is. I'm not overwhelmed by it. And I've offered a way out. I've offered a solution for your sin. And so as we grow in this, we will be able to function greater out of grace, right? To be able to own our stuff and look at it without the shame spirals. And so we can own it and name it and then walk in grace and freedom from it. So that ability comes largely from the wise, trusting, beloved self. So let's just picture for a moment. I'll picture what that looks like. Let's say a client comes in and says, I binged last night. I feel so embarrassed and I'm hating myself, right? And so we begin the process, like what happened, and we talk about the triggers, we talk about the behavior, we talk about all those things. The false self is going to try to manage all that shame. The false self is going to step in and say, I don't want to feel exposed. I don't want to feel ashamed. So I'm going to try harder. And if you just help me figure out how to try harder, Mr. Therapist, then we'll figure it out and it won't happen again. And sometimes trying harder looks like beating myself up. Like, I was just so stupid. I can't believe I did that. And at that point, we often think we're operating out of wisdom, but we're just using a different strategy of the old self. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Can you please stop calling me out, Travis? No, I'm just kidding. You're doing great.
Yeah, I'm just calling myself out. We all do it.
Okay.
You're not alone. This is human nature, what we're talking about.
It is. Okay, so look, I just demonstrated that I was feeling shame. Like, that's really what I was feeling, like embarrassed, because if you've listened to the podcast for a while, you know I've mentioned mismanager, the part of me that mismanages things and is the worst micromanager of my life, and that is constantly beating myself up and work, and those
Yep.
things. I guess I'm seeing myself in this. And so I'm going to say,
Mhm.
shame off me. I'm being curious. Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
Little Chrissy.
So a question to ask yourself is, underneath that shame, going back to those core needs of need to feel safe, understood, affirmed, blessed. Do any of those stand out to you? Do you remember that list?
Yeah.
Heard and understood.
Safe for sure. Understood.
Okay.
Well, tell me the list. I'll tell you. To probably check all of them.
Yeah. So when you're feeling shame, it's likely that you don't feel safe,
Yeah.
like emotionally or relationally safe.
Yeah.
Like, oh, I'm not good enough. I'm not good enough to be loved. I'm not acceptable enough to be loved, right?
Yeah.
So the question is asking that little girl kind of part of you, like, what's going on? Then we get to apply truth. So someone walks into my office, I binged last night, and then they kick into, I'm so stupid, I can't believe I did that. I just need to try harder. I need a new devotional. I need a new program. I need a new plan. I would just say that's all the false self. Here's what the wise, trusting, and beloved self would say. Yesterday, I binged. I think I probably binged because I felt afraid and I felt disappointed and I felt scared at work because fill in the blank happened. My boss was angry. I made a mistake. I got confronted and I felt unlovable and I felt afraid. And so my false self kicked in and wanted to escape. And I binged because it felt good and it felt helpful and it felt comforting. And so now I can look at that and say, that makes sense. It's understandable. I was scared. I felt ashamed. It makes sense that my false self kicked in. But I know that's not helpful. And I know I need Jesus. And I know that there's still something that God is working on in me. There's still something that needs to be saved and rescued. I need a savior.
You're saying this is the wise, trusting.
That's the wise, trusting, beloved self.
I'm looking
Yep.
at this and I'm like, okay, child, false self / survivor, wise, trusting, beloved self. So I'm almost looking at the timeline of 47 years that I've been on the earth. And I'm
Yep.
thinking, boy, I spent a lot of time with false self, and false self still comes into play, but I'm moving more into the wise, trusting, beloved self. This is a lot of therapy and
Yes.
healing and going to Jesus and having people in my life that
Yes.
can help me point me to truth, and support groups of people that can remind me of truth. But wisdom comes with age, and we go through these things and we
Mhm.
learn. Does it kind of play out most often in the timeline that way of someone's life?
If we're willing to do the work.
Oh, so someone may not ever really get into the wise, trusting, beloved self.
Absolutely. What we're talking about is sanctification and Christian growth.
Okay, yeah.
And now God will complete his work. And so he will bring Christians to total sanctification and justification in the new heavens and the new earth. How much of that we get to experience in this life, I think, lines up with how willing we are to participate with God in the process.
Yeah.
And I would also say this. I live more regularly out of the wise, trusting, beloved self today than I did 5 years ago. And I would still say, I feel like I'm in the false self 80% of the time,
Oh, yeah.
you know?
Yeah. Don't want to admit it, but yes.
I mean, I don't know. I just threw out 80%. It
Right.
could be 90%. I don't know. But it's like, it requires a constant surrender.
Yeah.
It requires constant awareness. I'm at a conference. I'm interacting with people all day. Boy, I tell you what, my false self wants to show up. I want to get people to like me.
Because it's probably on autopilot.
Yes, absolutely.
Just kicks in.
So the scripture that we'll use here to sort of begin to wrap up our time is Ephesians 4:22-24, in which Paul is writing essentially about this. He says, put off your old self, which belongs to your former manner of life and is corrupt through deceitful desires, and to be renewed in the spirit of your minds, and to put on the new self, created after the likeness of God in true righteousness and holiness. So this idea of I'm always putting off and I'm trying to put on. And so as we do that, we gain more of this ability to live in this self. And so we can dive a little bit more into the wise, beloved, trusting self in the next episode. I'm going to hand it back to you and say, what kind of concluding questions or thoughts do you have about this?
Ooh, it's all swirling in my head, not in a bad way, in a good way. And I think really being gently curious and intentional and bringing Jesus in. I think sometimes we feel like it has to be so pomp and circumstance. So, Heavenly Father, no. Hey, Jesus, I am really feeling embarrassed and ashamed about this. Talk to him like a friend. I'm a friend of God. He calls me friend, right? Like Jesus is our friend. And the more you spend time with him, conversing with him, especially about anything, but about things like this, like what we're talking about, the deeper your relationship will go, and removing all that perfectionism or the ways you think. Maybe that's even part of the false self of here, I think it needs to sound this way. And if it can't sound that way, then I'm not doing it at all. Like that's kind of how my prayer journaling, it was really hard on myself, because if I did not write in my journal and complete like a whole page every single day, I felt like the worst person and the worst Christian. And boy, Jesus has to just be so disappointed in me, knowing that's not true. One part of my brain can know that that's not true, but then my body was experiencing it in another way. So now I'm just trying to be gentle about it. And like sometimes I'm not going to fill my journal page today, but I'm going to spend time with Jesus. And that time's going to look like leaning back in this desk chair, closing my eyes and breathing in God's truth from his word and breathing it out and just spending time with him, just being with him rather than pen to paper. Like that's okay. I don't even know why I said all that, but I guess I'm just reminding myself, trying to bring the two together maybe.
Yeah, well, and you're naming, I think, one of the things that's true. There's some hard things that are true about living in the wise, beloved, trusting self that we'll get to in the next episode. But one of the beautiful things about it is a sense of rest. So we said that the false self tries to take care of the child self. As we grow in the wise, beloved, trusting self, we're working the old false self out of a job. So it starts to become more restful. We get to rest more emotionally, and our anxieties drop when we're in that place. And so it's a place where Jesus calls us to rest. And so when we go to him and rest, we're living out of that place. We're wise because we are trusting God and because we are beloved, right?
Amazing. Yes.
The wise, trusting, beloved self.
Yeah.
So maybe that's a good place to end.
It's a great place to end. I cannot wait for this next episode. I'm loving this. Friends, come back. Do not miss the next one. Thank you for listening to the Old School Food Freedom Podcast. For over 20 years, Finding Balance has been helping people walk in freedom by discovering where Jesus fits into their struggles with food and body image. If you want more biblical truth and encouragement, head on over to FindingBalance.com and subscribe to our free daily vitamin devotional. While you're there, explore our Christ-centered Lasting Freedom online course and small group tools. You can help keep this ministry going by donating today at FindingBalance.com. See you next time. The content in this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to diagnose, treat, or prescribe a particular course of action. If you have or suspect you may have an eating disorder, please consult your healthcare provider. If you desire to receive faith-based care, visit ChristianTreatmentFinder.com to browse professionals with a Kingdom campaign against eating disorders.